Hello fellow wargamers, Miranda here. Today I'm going to be doing a review of White Dwarf issue 488. So with 10th edition just around the corner, I figured it might make sense to brush up on some Warhammer 40k, and so I picked myself up a recent issue of White Dwarf. This is issue 488, and we were just going to go over it and see what's in the magazine this go around. The managing editor for White Dwarf is Lyle Lowry. Hi Lyle! We still need to get a game in. And he provides a good synopsis of what to expect in this month's issue. Did want to point out at the very beginning of the magazine, there's folks who will write in to White Dwarf, and this one fellow who decided to write in is a colored pencil artist. And he provided a colored pencil drawing, a still life photo of his miniatures that came out so beautifully. I wasn't sure if it was real. I had to look him up on Twitter, and he is a real person, so good job, Tom. There's a cool section in here by Leela Craven who talks about setting up online campaigns, being able to play even if you're not all in the same area, so great for those who have international friends who want to be able to play Age of Sigmar, was specifically what this went over, but you know, just techniques and ways of getting people to come together, building narrative campaigns by having a team of people, or maybe just like a game master person, and then having folks play games against each other and write in their scores or write in their story narratives. So it's all about building community, which is definitely a big focal point in this magazine. And then of course the new hotness has been boarding actions. This magazine does have several new tiles for boarding actions games, as well as a article in here from Duncan Wog. Really, GW? He talks about designing the actual Space Hulk layouts and how you don't necessarily follow what would be a real engineer's design of a Space Hulk. He talks about approaching it from an artistic perspective, which I definitely appreciate. The boarding action section also comes with 6 different new missions. They actually did a really cool thing with the boarding actions tiles this go around. For the missions they did in this magazine, Mark Bedford made custom tiles of the different like warp infected areas. So there's tentacles coming out and creepy swirly things, and they actually reference all of the miniatures they pull from to create those tiles. So I thought that was a lovely little touch, including the use of endless spells, which is probably my favorite thing in Age of Sigmar. So they have that made by, like I said, Mark Bedford. There was a warp portal that was sort of a kit bash, also really beautifully done by a Harvey Snape. And then the Reliquary Beast, which is part of the Herald of Misery story by Lyle Lowry. So he actually did some cool modeling putty work. I don't know if that's green stuff or what, but it looks good. So the conclusion of the Herald of Misery is part of the Arcs of Omen narrative campaign. If you're familiar with the tournament pack, Arcs of Omen, it's continuing all of that story. Space Marines against Iron Warriors to intercept a portal, to get an important message back to the Imperium. It's a very exciting story. Even as I'm coming in at the last minute on it, it's really fun to read. And then there's a battle report that accompanies it also that talks about how the game actually played out between the folks at GW and how closely it did end up mirroring their story. So it's a pretty fun read. It was a 5-round battle report. Again, a lot of going back and forth, and there was actually a really sweet dedication at the end for the game having been dedicated to an individual. So that was a very sweet touch. And then, of course, we have had the return of the Lion. Lionel Johnson has come back into the Imperium, into the eyes of the Emperor, and I guess he basically kind of crawled out of nowhere on some backwater planet, and like immediately there are folktales told of him, and just pages of rumors about him through different vox casts and just data transmissions that was pretty entertaining to read. The rules for him and his data slate is in this issue of the magazine if you want to know how basically badass he is for this edition. Alright, little interruption for the middle of this video. If you are enjoying this content, I do appreciate you being here. Make sure to let me know what you think of it by offering a like. And if you aren't subscribed to my channel but are interested in being subscribed, make sure to hit that button also. I do read the comments, so make sure to post a little comment below if you liked the content or if you didn't like the content. Let me know. There's also an article in here called The Sons of Sanguinius that regales the tale of Sanguinius, sacrificing himself to protect the emperor, and the blood angels that have, spawned from that Primarch. And they talk about the heritage of Sanguinius and making your own blood angels sub-chapters and how you can approach their paint job, their naming, as a sub-chapter, the lore behind it, and they even give an example in there, and there's some really beautiful army examples of what some of the folks painted for their armies. There's actually a lot of pages of Blood Angels in here. A lot of pages of Blood Angels in here. And that concludes the 40K section of it, because they do sort of break it more or less in half. You got your 40K chunk, and then we pop on over to the Age of Sigmar. So Age of Sigmar definitely seems like the type of game that revolves around narrative play, or at least that seems to be the most popular play style of Age of Sigmar. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I know that most people I know who play it love to play it narratively, but there is an article on approaching the game narratively specifically, and I kind of appreciate what Mr. Jimbo Worth is talking about here, because he illuminates the importance of talking to your opponent before having a game with them, because it is important to make sure you are on the same page with your, I say opponent, he calls them co-players, the idea being, it takes two to play these games, at least two, and the idea being that you want to be on the same page with them. So if someone wants to play hyper competitively and the other wants to play like this fluffy narrative situation, well, they're not going to have a good time playing against each other unless they agree to some sort of compromise. And so it really just talks about the importance of discussing that ahead of time. So, try not to be too shy in bringing that up. I know that there's always plenty of awkward conversations when some of that comes up, because a lot of times people might be like, well, I just won't play it very competitively. And it's like, no, your list should probably be built to have some kind of theme to it. Like, that min-maxing is not going to work here. Or if you do want to play hyper competitively, then have at it and go nuts. It's just a matter of being on the same page. We then jump into a lovely little article by Thomas Elliott about his illustration work on the Sons of Behemoth. He created the illustrations for these huge giants for the game, and he discusses how he approaches representing the scale in the game and in illustrations. And a lot of times it's perspective or relative size, so there'll be human-sized characters in the image, and so that they're fighting giants. There's a cool layout of the different stages of his artwork getting completed, and just a bunch of work that he did on creating these really cool images. Then we follow up with another Flashpoint called The Butcher's Bill. This is where we follow, ogres? They're not ogres, they're orgers? Anyway, against the daughters of Cain, there is a nasty little curse that seems to sweep the ogres, and they start starving, basically, so they have to, you just go slaughter your neighbors as an offering to Gorkamork, the, what is he called? The Gulping God, which I thought was apropos. So that ended up being a rather entertaining, although kind of gross story, because the way the ogres eat is they don't ever cook anything, they just mulch their food up and drink it, which is basically like chum, and never mind, maybe I didn't like that story very much. And of course this Flashpoint is followed up with a lovely little scenario that folks can play of the Bloodgut Maw tribe against the Harkonnen, or the ogres versus the daughters of Cain. Then the next section, we jump into a little snippet for Warcry fans. There is a little narrative called Predator and Prey, in which you have the Claws of Karanak versus the Askurgan These names don't make any sense. So you have the Claws of Karanak versus the Askurgan Trueblades, which are Khorne berserkers, basically, versus vampires. And there's a whole narrative on that, followed up with an actual, I guess, a scenario. You have these relics that are given to you, and these quests, I guess. You go on quests if you play Warcry. So they give a whole layout, so if you want to play that. And they also say that if you don't have those particular warbands, you could modify the story to be a little bit different so it makes it work for yours. The next snippet is for the Necromunda fans out there. This is a story of, hive gangs taking over the Two Tunnels area. It's a specific narrative campaign that's discussed in here, and so they encourage you to play with that specific narrative campaign. They reference the Aranthian Succession Sindarak Burning specifically. So for you Necromunda fans, I hope you know what I'm talking about. Toward the end of the magazine, there is I guess part 4 of an ongoing series in the Grombrindle serial, King Oskik's Prize by Chris Thurston. Now, I thought jumping into this at part 4 would be totally confusing, and I don't have any idea what's going on. And I only slightly didn't have any idea what was going on. They did a pretty good job of, if you come into this later, having some idea. I mean, the first several paragraphs you read through, for the most part, I was not sure where we were going with it. It just seemed like some waxing poetic. And then all of a sudden it kind of cinched into like the reality of where this character is. And it ended up being a bit of a riveting story. So I have to say, I'm impressed. I did very much enjoy reading King Oskik's Prize. I'm gonna have to go back and read the other 3 parts to this series. And that's pretty much the end of the magazine. You've got a little inside the studio blurb, getting some really cool beauty shots of, I'm assuming, some of the GW employees' armies. Really, really beautiful Kagra's Ravagers, mad mobs like orcs, of course the lovely undead, which were always my favorite in Age of Sigmar. And then the hobby bingo for, the month? I don't know how you would get all of this done in a month, but either way, hobby bingo as well. And that is what all was in this White Dwarf magazine this go around. Quite an enjoyable read. Doesn't take all that long, just, a few hours of your time if you're sitting around just enjoying it leisurely. And I don't know. I think some of my favorite parts in it were the Herald of Misery conclusion, to see like the dire situation that the Space Marines found themselves in. And yeah, that story at the end, the Grombrindle story, was really, really enjoyable. So if you already have this magazine, do you have a favorite section of it? Do you guys normally buy White Dwarf, or is it only when there's a special article or new rules or something coming out? What do you like about White Dwarf? Let me know in the comments. I'll be sure to be checking those out. And yeah, otherwise, thank you all for watching. You have a wonderful day.